Yeah, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be. I was meant to be in person, obviously, in Utrecht, but given the circumstances, mobility is not easy in these times. And if it's not easy for the so-called high-skilled migrants and European mobile people, you can imagine also for the rest of the people that attempt crossing and traverse and to cross borders. I have a very short presentation. It's just a series of photos that I want to use just to pick up some of the key points that have been debated in the last few months around the impact of the pandemic. It's first of all, the emphasis has been a lot on the a question around, is there the end of the so-called age of migration? And there is some very interesting reflection by, for example, my former colleague Alan Gamlin that looks at what are basically we see now is a significant slowdown of the movement across borders. Is this a short-term phenomenon, or is going to have long-term impact? And it's clearly an important discussion. But what is actually seems to be out of the conversation, as also Bruno has pointed out, is something else. Is what about the migrants, those who are already in the place outside their national borders or in different countries, so they're stranded during their migratory trajectory journeys. This seems to be much less in the conversation. I'm thinking about the impact on migrants, not just vulnerable migrants, but also asylum seekers, refugees, and other different cohort of people on the move. One of the things that could be useful just as a starting point, yes, maybe we are seeing something there. If you look at the data, the most recent data on asylum application within the European context, you can see that in April and May, there has been a very significant decline in the number of asylum application. What you see actually interesting, though, if you look at the first instance decision is also interesting. And what you see is that actually there has been a relatively more positive attitude vis-a-vis the application that have been processed. So it looks like basically that the Asylum Commission have been more positive in their assessment considering the circumstances. This would be one of the possible interpretation. We have seen also quite interesting in a sense some of the story that have very much characterized the last few months, at least in a British but also French and some extent European context, been also the debate about are we witnessing a new new refugee crisis this time in the English Channel. And the photo on the background is a series of dinghy that have been rescued on the beach in England. Well, and you can see that somehow the tones of the conversation, at least within the tabloid media in UK, they are echoing very much the refugee crisis of 2015. So the army has been deployed. What is actually interesting, though, if you look at, I try to compare. I don't know if you can see the full screen, because on my side I cannot see the full screen because I see the faces of the other speakers, so I don't see the far left, but perfect. Yeah, no, just because the point there was at the last column, the 2020 is clear that while there has been an increase of crossing through the channel, about 5,000 since the beginning of the year, actually what you can see is a decline of about 40% if you compare just the second quarter in the last 5 years of the number of asylum applications. So what you see here is that basically, rather than an increase or a migration crisis, what you see is a change in the route taken by those who try to cross the channel, so to move especially from Calais towards the United Kingdom. Why is that the case? Well, because basically there has been no lorries crossing the channel, so the number of lorries that have crossed has much declined. The flights have been basically cancelled, or control have been increased massively on air flights. So the dinghy is more like an alternative in the absence of other means of transport and routes. So it's quite interesting. So the point is, what we are seeing in the context of the pandemic is not just a stop in the mobility, but we also see re-emerging new routes, a new way of moving, new forms of adaptation in the moment. One thing which I found really interesting and important to reflect, and I know I don't see my clock, but I'm almost closing, is that one of the slogans that we have heard a lot in in the last 2, 3, 4 months, 6 months, has been an invitation for people to stay at home to protect and save lives, which is obviously a very important public health suggestion. But we also know that if everyone was staying at home, our society would have collapsed. And there has been people that actually had to go to work in order for us to stay at home. Among these people, a lot of them were the so-called low-skilled migrants then they got relabeled key workers, although still with the same working condition and salaries. So that's quite an interesting angle, because there has been, as part of the pandemic, also an attempt at of a counter-narrative in relation to the low-skilled migrants and the way of presenting more positively some groups. But at the same time, we have also have the very dominant narrative, especially for coming from the US, of the migrants as public health threat, the closure of borders, etc. So there, we have seen a quite polarized narrative. The other point which is interesting and really important to remember, when we say stay at home, somehow we assume, and this is quite interesting, a very interesting observation when you do Zoom conversation, to look at the background of people. And it's not everyone can stay at home, or not everyone has got home where to stay, or not for everyone, home is safer than being outside. Okay, so the recent case in Moira, in the fires, that were very much initiated as a response to the total closure of the camp as a result of I think it was 35 cases, so positive case on the coronavirus, is a very in a sense iconic of this. So in that case, what you have, one of the responses that we have seen in European context, but also at the border of Europe, has been basically the closure of the so-called dangerous, those that are deemed to be dangerous population in confined space. Then if you have a place like Moira, where a place which is for about 3,000 people that host 12,000 people, you can imagine the condition in there. What does it mean to stay at home? And finally, so what it seems to be interesting in terms of policy development at the moment, I don't know if you have heard that the European Commission President has announced that we're going to get rid of the Dublin regulation and new governance on migration is coming out. It's very unclear what is new in this new governance of migration and to what extent they will really be able to get rid of the Dublin regulation, knowing that there has been always a huge resistance from a number of countries to a change. What is interesting here, that the current condition in which they see very much a polarization of the debate, there has been a growing anti-xenophobia within the European vote, among the European voters, it seems very much over-optimistic to think that in the context of the pandemic, where governments are going to look for scapegoats for the economic crisis that is going to come massively, that may be possible to have more solidarity within European context vis-a-vis migrants and refugees. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this good overview. Let me also cancel the big spotlight video. Thank you very much for putting a number of big themes on the table, both what's happening in terms of the statistics, what's happening in terms of discourse, what's happening in terms of policy developments. I think it's a wonderful opening to the discussion that I hope we'll have. As Bruno already indicated, what we want to do with this discussion is to enable you to ask questions already via the chat, so you might want to respond, you might want to have thoughts in mind. Please feel free to do so via the Zoom chat function, and then after our 4 speakers we'll have a general moderated discussion, but feel free to already ask your questions or maybe add your thoughts via the chat so that we can engage as much as possible. Okay, so let's move to the next speaker, who is Maggi Leung, who's a professor, an associate professor at the Department of Human Geography and Spatial Planning, so at Utrecht University, who received a seed money grant earlier this morning from our focus area on migration and societal change, to conduct research on prejudice, stigma and discrimination practiced on but also resisted by people of Asian appearance in Europe during the COVID pandemic. From the perspective of our focus group, we were very happy with this application because it was so topical, and I think we're happy to support it, and also very curious to see where you are at this point in time, Maggie, with your findings. So I'm noting it's 16:17. You have 7 minutes, and the floor is completely yours. I'm going to spotlight you, and there we go.
Thank you, Barbara. 7 minutes, very short. So I will also try to introduce our project, obviously, and then point to some of the first insights. As said, our project is short acronym COVID. It's about countering the virus, looking at stigmatization, but also protestation against that in multicultural Europe. I'm here alone today. Oh, I cannot move. Oh, yes. But I would like to point out that I have a lovely team members, and we are in a multidisciplinary group with Rick, Janbo, and Ena. Also outside of the universities, we are working together on this project. They might be here today as well. Getting into the project rationale, as Barbara also introduced to you, we wrote this proposal at the so-called the beginning of the crisis, that is to say when it made its way to Europe. That was in the spring of 2020. And maybe you also recall there were incidents, and you also see some of these snapshots on the slide that sort of signal prejudice, stigmatization, discrimination of Chinese people or Asian appearance people in Europe. And that was the sort of the push for us to write this proposal. And we wanted to use the seed money to, of course, do research, but less to say to chart what has happened, but really to talk to people of this kind of background and how they experience this kind of incidents, even if not, how do they react or feel about what's happening in physical spaces, but also on the social or in the virtual spaces and these kind of issues. And beyond the experience of these prejudice and stigmatization, we are very interested in looking at how people protest, counter this kind of prejudice. In particular, because of Rick's background also in humanities, we would like to look at artistic expression, the use of social media space as protest and alliance building. If you look at see my background, I on purpose found one of these. This is like a Chinese second generation migrant, a young person anyway, a Chinese background, who did this sort of live art performance in Italy, asking people to come and touch him at that time when there were a lot of sort of association of the virus with Chinese people. The project also has a participatory, action-oriented approach. We work with Ena with her organization. Hopefully, we will be able to organize a multi-stakeholder discussion live and also a hands-on workshop. Otherwise, we'll do it also online. So progress. Yeah, Barbara said, I want to hear some progress.
I'm just interested.
Yes, we have made some progress. Yes. Indeed, we were very excited. With the money, we have also engaged Janbo, my former master student. He has been very helpful, in looking through a lot of media materials. Also interviews with individuals with Chinese and Asian experiences. Quite a few of them are young students or former students. Whom he has good, sort of connection to, and then could snowball contacts. We have also done quite a bit of participant observation on web forums. Because of the COVID, also a lot of things are done online, and that has become also very much our research field. Just a few words about the pictures I put on the side. You see, there's a web chat, of a Chinese person who has a white shirt. He's one of the leading Chinese public health scientists, and he has been on this kind of talking to the diaspora, kind of events, speaking to Chinese migrants all over. There is a photo of lots of young people holding a box with a mask, and that is taken in the Netherlands, where Chinese students were given these so-called care packages from the from the Chinese government through the embassy. So that's also very interesting. It's become also one of the topics that we want to study. How the Chinese state is carrying at the same time exerting control over its diaspora in time of the pandemic. The other two photos are protests, as you see. One taken a photo that I took on the internet where business in Chinatown is saying that we are not virus, we are not, or come and patron our businesses. And the one on right hand down lower corner are by young people who actually have joined this "I'm Not a Virus" social movement. I think a lot of you might have heard this. It's been quite widespread also in Europe and beyond. So all these are some snapshots, really, what we have done in the past months, what we've been thinking about. These are some of the first insights I want to summarize. First of all, we have seen, of course, there are incidents of stigmatization. What we like to point out is that what we have learned is that it's obviously a very complex web of, power relation negotiations. We need to depart from this sort of majority vis-a-vis minority binary. This is not about white Dutch against the Chinese, but we've heard from people saying yes, some of these stigmatization actually come from other migrants. We definitely need a more intersectional approach where we have to go beyond these very simplified race, ethnicity kind of axis of difference. We found that gender is a very important category, age also, and of course class. We have taken a look and we'll do more to look at the role the Chinese state has set in carrying and controlling its diaspora, also in relation with the whole this coronavirus diplomacy issue, the important role of social media as a space for resource information for migrants, but also as practices and contestation of stigmatization, and also where their identities are being reconstructed, negotiated, and contested as well. Also among the Chinese, right, because there are all kinds of Chinese migrants and diaspora dealing with each other in this social space. Last but not least, I think we need to also think about these, we are studying corona and stigmatization sort of associated with it, but this is not things to be considered in isolation. We see that, of course, also practically, but also conceptually, we should think about all these as much longer term racialization of Asians and other social groups in the Netherlands and beyond Europe, and then also the linkage to other movements. We also hear from our interviewees where we say, we also have something to relate to this whole Black Lives Matter. This is related to racialization, but also related to corona, and therefore, I think these kind of struggles and also protestation should be seen as something that with linkage to other debates and other struggles. I think I'll stop here. I think I've used my 7 minutes, and I welcome your comments and questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Maggie. Much appreciated. And also this, these first insights, and also the way in which we can learn so much from what's happening these days, and also how I think as researchers to respond also to the crisis. I see that Ilse has already placed a question in the chat, so this is something all of you can do, and I can imagine a lot of you have ideas and responses also to what Maggie shared with us. So from this topic of corona, racism, we now move to what's happening in one particular place in the world, which happens to be the place where our university is based. Not me personally, because I'm in another corner of the Netherlands, but we really physically go to Utrecht because we're very interested to learn from Jan Braat, who is a senior policy advisor on migration, diversity and integration at the municipality of Utrecht. How you, Jan, see what's happening in times of COVID in the municipality of Utrecht, and this is also because we have an audience from all over the world, but I think it's interesting to zoom in on one particular place also as a starting point for our reflection. So Jan, the floor is all yours. What's happening in the city of Utrecht with the migrants in these very strange times?
Yeah. Hello everyone. I will tell you something about Utrecht. I first tell you before I go to the topic of the influence of the COVID-19 pandemic on the local level and the migrant population in Utrecht. I tell you something about Utrecht because it's very important to know that Utrecht is an arrival and welcoming city for refugee and migrants. 35% of the population has a migrant background. On children in school, it's more than 50%. So for us, they are just Utrecht population, and we have to acknowledge that there are a very big portion, and maybe in the future the majority of Utrecht has of the population has a migrant background. So that's quite normal for us. And to be a welcoming city, we, if you, for example, if I, for example, focus on refugees, it means that we activate and integrate them from day one, already in the asylum center in Utrecht. We don't want people to do nothing. No, we from day one we want to activate them with personal development programs, and that's what we do in our Plan Einstein program. That newly arriving asylum seekers, refugees, migrants, and local people in the neighborhood do all kinds of courses like English, ICT, like setting up a business, learning entrepreneurial skills, do networking with our Welcome in Utrecht organization, all kinds of voluntary activities. Why do we do that? This is because of we think if we start at once, people will integrate much easier and much better in our city. So that's and that means that we also use a positive narrative on this group, because we think newly arrived migrants have all kinds of skills, and also all kinds of skills that we need in our city. And the only thing, they not always know the way around, or they have the networks to get a job, or where to start their education, and so on and so on. So we try to support them for that. And one of the one of the instruments we use is free open spaces. There's all kinds of spaces where refugees, migrants, Utrecht population can meet, and then from there on the networking can start, and also it's a way to counter the loneliness of people, and especially, for example, migrant women, or women who later when come to Holland and Utrecht with family reunification, because there's always a risk that they stay at home and then they can't develop themselves. And what is happening now because of the pandemic, these kind of spaces or all kinds of programs were much more difficult to organize. Of course, you can do something like Zoom and so on, but that is not really working quite well to set up your network, to learn, to know more people, to learn what kind of skills you need in a job, or learn the language. So the COVID-19 pandemic makes the lives for migrants and newly arrived migrants and refugees much more difficult. And then and if they had already had a job, they were most of the time low-paid jobs, or they have not a permanent contract, but they have and they are fired. They will be fired, and we are expecting this also the coming months. Much more people with a migrant background will lose their jobs. So we are quite worried about that. So that's what it's quite difficult if we want to reach them again and to find some new ways that they can develop themselves. So that's although we are quite open city for example, refugees, we see some difficulties how we can, in practice, that our policies can be a success in pandemic times, because only Zoom meetings or whatever that doesn't help. So we hope that the 1.5 meter distancing won't be forever, and that our free open spaces, because that is one of the vital success factors for meeting each other and getting to start your network, will be possible again, or in some form, and that it won't be closed like the voorkamer that will speak after me. So so that's one of the challenges on a local level we have, although in 1 July 2021 we get the competence for organizing the language lessons for the Dutch language lessons, and that was not a competence on the moment, and that can be some starting point that we can really know everyone and have our policy still be successful, put in place also on this group, and also in the women we find it difficult to reach normally. So okay. I think this is it.
Yes, well, thank you very much also for giving insight into also the big challenges that even a city like Utrecht and a municipality like yourself is facing at the moment. As said, this focus on Utrecht, how are migrants and refugees doing in Utrecht? We now continue by hearing from Salma Fayyad, who is one of the core members of a community called the Voorkamer in Utrecht, about her work. Salma holds a master in conflict studies and human rights, and as said, this Voorkamer is really a place where people of diverse backgrounds in Utrecht meet. And then of course the big question and the big interest now is, Salma, is this working in the times of pandemic? Do people meet, or do you have the same worries as Jan just shared with us? Wait, let me unmute you. It will take some time for you to be unmuted.
Yeah, is it
yes,
now?
We hear you, yes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the invitation, and I'm happy that the Voorkamer is part of this conversation, because I believe of the importance of having the diverse community voices and the social aspect into consideration. And to be honest, this is my first time to join a webinar, and I knew about it just yesterday, so I'm not very well prepared. Just to feel more comfortable, I'm sharing this with you. Actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, I could see more similarities between people than ever before, and also than the current period. People share like the fear of catching the virus, and they were united by this uncertainty toward the future plan. And but also at the same time, the crisis is highlighting differences among people. Some are losing their minds because of the temporary imposed social distance, but the other are just another obstacle in their life. But what many of us don't know is that for some people, including newcomers and refugees, the social distancing measures are not so different from their ordinary daily life. So we are in the in the four-kamer, where people are the main base that we build our projects and activities on. It's normal that our work will be affected by the energy and well-being of our community. And to create an inclusive space, we need personal connection and equal relationships. These are like the basic key, or the most important key. So before delving into the impact of the pandemic on our space and our work, it's essential to highlight some of the negative aspects of the virus that people in the AZC, who are one of our main target groups, are suffering from. And next to the isolation that all of us suffered from, and suspending all the social activities inside and outside the AZC, their legal procedures were also suspended for unlimited time. Many friends and community members don't know anything about their situation, and the most difficult part is family reunion. Because embassies are still closed, Dutch embassies are still closed in many countries, but opened in others. However, the Dutch immigration department cannot think out of the box and, for instance, move people's cases to other countries, or create another way of dealing with the situation. And the only answer they have is, okay, we don't know, you have to wait. And of course, this situation led asylum seekers to think that they are not important at all, or they are not a priority. So adding to this, they are suffering from loneliness, and they experience the lack of connectedness with other people. And this, of course, affect their engagement and energy, and eventually their integration in society. Inclusive spaces get their energy and inspiration from the talents and experiences of people, and COVID-19 makes this very challenging. The volunteers of the four-kamer are demotivated to work online, and people are depressed and hopeless either because of their legal status or isolation, and cannot be as positive as often as before. This at the end has created a big distance from the community, and the biggest challenge for us was how to keep our community connected and bring the energy of the volunteers back. However, from the very beginning, we tried to create new ideas, and a lot of our energy and productivity were spent on thinking and experimenting. At first, we were a bit slow to find the right way of communication, and when we made our plan, new regulations came up. Then slowly, we started to see some changes in policy with 1.5 meter distance. And this allows a bit more and more forms of interaction and contact, but left us all at the same time in a standby mode to keep up with the new regulation. But gradually, which is really nice, we started to deal with the measures as a design challenge. So what we did, we worked on a whole summer program that dealt with social distance as a creative element. So we had aqua gym in outside, where we used small individual swimming pools where people tried to exercise there, and it was a nice idea to have, and with the good weather also. And also we tried to transform our regular activities into online events, and we asked the community to help make the content. We tried to keep our community engaged by creating the four-kamer community diary, where people shared their daily life during isolation, in a short written story or a photo that captures their day, a joke, a tear, or any other expressive form. And after opening for a limited number of participants, we focused more on small groups of people and on more quality activities. So we managed to exclude some of our regular activities, like Dutch language cafe and Arabic language cafe, and women gatherings. And also we adopted the completing, not competing policy So we started to collaborate more with other organizations and initiatives that have bigger spaces like the neighborhood, BAC, and other places. And also, as Jan said, some of the free spaces that the Gemeente offers. We also, I can say that we managed in responding to the restrictions and rules. However, the open door policy that the Voorkamer adopted from the very beginning and the spontaneity, which is a core aspect of inclusive spaces, were missing. Also, with the online events, I think every one of us, and we also assumed that everyone can join and everyone has access. But actually, people in the refugee camps have a very poor internet connection, and that we were not really aware of, and we tried to solve this problem for them. And sometimes some people don't also know how to register or sign up to some of our activities, and not only our activities, like sign forms and log in and fill all these like health, mandatory health forms. So also like at the end, like those constant changes like create a lot of uncertainty for us, and I think for everyone. And some people cannot work without a clear plan. But for me personally and the team of the Voorkamer, this is somehow is giving us more flexibility and helping us to grow and develop our skills and creativity more in a short time.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm done actually.
Sorry?
That's my last sentence.
Oh, it was your last, sorry, yes, I'm just looking at the at the time, but thank you so much for giving this very inspiring example, I think, and also boots on the ground instance of what you encounter in your work. So I think by now we've had a whole palette of the big picture, Maggie's research, examples from Utrecht. We have a wonderful audience here today, 69 people, really from all corners, I think, of the globe, if I look quickly, and working on these themes. And some people have already started asking questions via the chat. So what I want to propose is that we first pick up those questions, and then please also feel free to add more questions. I think it's good, as some of you did, to really address a specific speaker also. So the first question I noted was one from Ilse van Liemt to Nando. Very much looking forward towards the new EU Migration Pact that will be presented next week on the 23rd. Nando, you don't have a crystal ball, but Ilse asks you, what do you think the new governance of migration will look like?
Anything which is going to be in this package is going to have a very hard chance, I mean, in the sense of being implemented. I mean, what we see happening in a sense is that the Commission took the opportunity to use the fires in Moira to trigger a more positive and collective response from the European Union as a whole to the situation of refugees. So this is how it comes. The problem is, though, that the situation in Moira is the result exactly of the European policies. I mean, the overcrowd in Moira is the result of the fact that other European member states didn't want to take people from Greece, despite the fact that there is already a system of relocation for asylum seekers. It's extremely hard for that to actually work. So I'm really not sure where we're going to get the political will for the European Union to take more responsibility in managing the governments. I mean, some of the things that were referred to in the State of the Union speech early this week by the European Commission were things that already existed. I mean, it was nothing particularly new. There was an invitation for countries to join forces, an invitation to countries that, yeah, it's very easy to blame the European Commission, but your Commission can only go as far as European member states allow to go. So, and the fact that it was very hard to find enough countries wanting to take the refugees and asylum seekers from the camp in Greece, even after the fires, is already to me a testament of how difficult it's going to be to get a European harmonized response to asylum and migration.
Yeah. I'd be really curious to hear what also the other people have in terms of predictions. So even if you don't want to ask a question, but you have ideas on the extent to which indeed the fire in Moria will make a difference, what the new migration pact will bring, please feel free to share via the chat. There was also a question from Marca Valenta to Maggie. Maggie, I suppose you have read it already. It's about how specific what we see in the Netherlands, in Europe is, or to what extent it's really a global trend. Yeah, what's your ideas on this, Maggie?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Before I do this one, maybe I also have a little comments on Nando's responses about the migration pact. I think what we saw when Ursula von der Leyen got into office, the first thing is that, before commitment, there was always this confirmation that we will make sure that, our border is proof, So I'm afraid that we'll be hearing that. Actually, that's probably the more confident part of what will come out of this. But back to the question that I got, I really appreciate the question, because obviously my seed project is about, corona racism against Asian-looking people, Chinese-looking people in particular. But I'm not arguing at all that, racism, discrimination against Asian or Chinese people is something that is different. However, it provides an opportunity for us to see something that is also quite unique. Like, for example, when we're seeing the role of the Chinese state in reaching, caring for, but also controlling the diaspora. You're right, that racism is so viral. I mean, some say that it's even worse than the virus itself, right? And we see this kind of stigmatization, not only about foreigners being discriminated in China, but also very much the Chinese in Africa. Yeah, so you're seeing this kind of mechanism going around the world. So in one way, they do share, right, a lot, the way how it's being practiced, and often also the ways how they're being countered. We see people going on the street, we see, in the web, social media being an important space. But I think it's very important to contextualize how COVID-induced racialization and other forms of discrimination is not only racial. Sometimes these kind of stigmatization is, oh, look at the students, or the returnees, the migrant coming into work. So we're not actually only talking about racism, but many other kind of isms, and operating in an intersectional kind of way. But I think it's very important to think about the options people have to counter this kind of stigmatization, discrimination. Okay. As we see, for some, it might be losing their livelihood or even their lives, while for some others in a different position in the in the society or in the system, where the impact may be they have to get the next air tickets and wait for the next seat and fly home. Yeah. So I think thinking about that, then we see why do we want to talk about racialization and discrimination? It's also because about how people are positioned so differently in having options to counter that.
Thank you very much. I think this is one of the big things coming out of this conversation also, the degree to which there's very different kinds of vulnerabilities, and intersectionality is very important here. There was also a question by Rafael Severnis, if I pronounced that right, specifically to Jan Braat. Jan, you might have read this. It's about affordable housing in Utrecht, and to what extent this can be guaranteed to migrants. Yeah, Jan, what's your perspective on this?
My answer for that is in a way quite easy. In the Netherlands, there is the rule that every municipality has to house newly arrived refugees with international protection. So So Utrecht also has to do that. This year 300, next year maybe 600. And we house them in social housing, and they get at number 1 in the waiting list, because normally the waiting list for social housing is 10 years in Utrecht, but we can't let them wait for 10 years. That's quite easy. Although it is sometimes difficult, because the amount of social housing in Utrecht is decreasing, and even more people want also a house for an affordable price. But on the moment, this is not a big problem. Maybe some for the youngsters who are 18, 19, 20, who don't have a lot of social benefits and have to go into a room. But we are looking into student rooms. For that, we have a project with the Academy of the City, which is called before it was called the Student Refugee Community, where students introduce young refugees into student complexes, so that when they talk when there is a new room, they make more chance on a room, because they don't know this kind of rules. So there is not a real problem.
So thank you very much. I'd actually also be interested in hearing from Salma. Salma, to what extent this issue of housing, affordable housing, the people you work with and you're in daily contact with, to what extent is this an issue to them? What's your experience here?
It's, of course, it's the #1 issue after their after getting their status, because they need this to settle down. And yeah, of course, they had to wait more and longer than before because of Corona.
Yeah.
And some of them, yeah, like actually everything is interconnected. So because also family reunion for some people is, like people I know personally, is like on hold now. So they got like a small house for this period, but then it's not their final house. So also this gives, it's good to have it, but it gives them less stability and comfort.
Yeah. I think this is another key word, this whole uncertainty and navigating uncertainty. It's something that you do with an organization like yours, but it's also clearly something that applies maybe even more than in other times for refugees and migrants. Yeah, and then we have an iPhone speaking. These days iPhones also join seminars and they ask questions, big questions in this case, to Nando. Yeah, to what extent is what we are seeing here? I have to take back the question. But is it really a dream of the global right? This end of migration discourse. This is what I recall as being the question. Nando, you probably also saw it in the chat. So what's your take on this? Is this just?
Yeah, I think, I mean, if it's connected with the point I did at the beginning on the age of migration being finished or not, I think what we're going to see is a kind of a regionalization of mobility more. So the idea that countries will create bridges between them, relatively small, so a kind of a reshaping of the geopolitics potentially. It depends how long it lasts, essentially, the pandemic, because then it's going to force also for a certain change in the production chains, etc. In terms of Maggi presentation and the role of China, I think another country which would be very interesting to compare is Turkey. Turkey has been very active with their nationals abroad, especially in Europe. They organized trips back to Turkey, including for people that actually were resident in Germany for 3 generations, and they offered accommodation for a long period during the quarantine. And then, so it's quite interesting how this using the pandemic as a tool for diasporic politics. I think it's something that we really need to pay attention to, because also it will create a bond with your citizen abroad, especially if they feel that they've been marginalized in their country of residence. And the other thing which I think I wanted to mention was also about this idea that around the solidarity within European Union, and the issue how Moria, what has revealed is actually that up until now, the only way that the European member states managed to find some kind of agreement around the management of asylum and irregular crossing was by offshoring the problem. You know, they created a lot of space of containment at the border of Europe that enable one thing in particular, which is the invisibility. Something that has been happening also with COVID within Europe. The moment that the problem is no longer visible. Moria was not visible until people set fire to the camp and decided to oppose to be resettled in another camp, and they are basically staying on the street on the island. It's a way basically you need the public space, not just as a place for enhancing solidarity and integration, as was painted before by Jan, for example, but you need also for claiming rights and raising issues. We need people need to be visible, especially people without rights need to be able to be visible, and the current context makes it more difficult.
Yes, thank you very much also for responding to the question put forward by Sandra Ponsanese. Yeah, we're nearly at the end of the seminar. There's a very, I think, a compliment to Salma in terms of the design thinking. And there's Salma's question to Jan. So what could be the future of inclusive spaces? Jan, can you say something about that in a few seconds, or is that asking too much?
If we can arrange something with the spatial distancing in COVID-19, if that something is solved, I think that is the big future of all these free open spaces like the Voorkamer and others, because then what the professor said, we make people visible and they can meet and they can develop themselves, and so I think that is something to go forward.
Yeah. I must say, at our university, one of the things we're doing is we're doing a lot of outdoor teaching, and in doing so also kind of reclaiming the city. So we just take the parks and we take open spaces and we meet there. And of course, in these times of climate change, this can go on for much longer in the fall than maybe would have been the case otherwise. So maybe there's something in like kind of reclaiming the outdoors, that where there's room for development. On the other hand, it's of course heartbreaking that so many people are out in open spaces and that nobody is opening the doors and providing them with a shelter, as the example of Maria has shown. So I think in 1 hour we've had a whole palette of what's happening in terms of migration, the big picture, the zooming in on what's happening in Utrecht, the role of discourse, how this discourse is changing. I must say I really enjoyed it and learned a lot from it in terms of reflection for our focus group. I already see messages coming by of colleagues saying, oh, maybe we can connect those people. So also for the focus group, we're learning from it. One of the things I want to try to do next time is to create a mechanism where there's even more space for interaction. But as said, for now, I think we've learned a lot. It's a pity we can't all now go outside and have a drink together and continue the conversation one-on-one. But the best I have to offer you in terms of a Friday afternoon thing is some final words from our coordinator, Bruno Meus. So Bruno, the floor is yours, and then after that we can close.
Yeah, this is probably not exactly the drink you would usually enjoy after a seminar. So I can only invite you to drink on your own, I would say. Or somehow online connected. So thanks Barbara, thanks to all the speakers, and thanks to all the audience for their contribution here. I would like to invite to keep this conversation going. We are starting up our activities online. We have already a blog running on our website, so send in your blog IDs so we can together work them out and create interesting blogs on our website. Send also in IDs for a webinar. I think we have touched upon a number of themes here that can be elaborated further, and we also know now that there is a lot of enthusiasm to attend these webinars. And finally, subscribe to our newsletter. Again, keep an eye on the website and the Facebook page. And we hope to see you soon in an online or an offline environment. Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much, and also thank you for thanking us. So we clock out, and we wish you a wonderful weekend. It's really wonderful that so many of you joined, and we will undoubtedly be in touch. All the best.